Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the new Sword and Shield stuff, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using the code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are breaking down the top 10 decks for the Oceania International Championships, and also the top 10 of Sword and Shield. We've had a couple weeks now on the ladder to test things out. People are now making their way over to Melbourne, and we're going to start to see these cards in action. So we're going to be breaking down my top 10 based on a lot of speculation, a lot of theory, as well as the amount of testing that I've put in so far. So yeah, let's break things down. Starting off in at number 10, you can see my rank in the top left, but also the community's rank. Thanks to everyone who voted on the poll I put on the Facebook page, Burbank City Gym. So you don't only have my own opinion here, you also get the community's say on decks. So we'll start off with Blacephalon GX. It's kind of a tried and trusted deck for a long time. I think its typing is one of the best things it has going for it, and with a couple annoying archetypes popping up in the form of Cinccino Mill, as well as the Goons decks based on Obstagoon just using Obstruct, Blacephalon GX naturally has pretty decent answers to that in having some evolution attackers, and if you're against the control decks, you have Stinger as well into the Psychic Blown that can do some spreading afterwards. So this deck naturally has some decent answers. We saw at the last Internationals, a Blacephalon GX made top 8 that was playing the Stinger and the Psychic Blown combo, and I think he actually made top 4 even, because in top 8 he faced the Florgus Dolls deck. So we know Blacephalon can naturally have some answers for controlling decks. You naturally answer Goons, so you have a couple nice close auto wins to you, really. I would say favourable for Goons and Make Do Mill, because you can only really one-shot the Obstagoon easily with Blacephalon, with Naga GX, and sometimes you can use your Turning Point turn as well to get through their Goons, but I think they can be, spamming Marnies and stuff and disrupting you at times. Against the Mill deck, every now and then they can cheese you just by doing Belelba early enough and getting some key pieces out of your deck too quickly. Like if you just get rid of your Stinger, if they throw away your energy cards before you can access them. Obviously, Beast Ring won't be live, so you physically have to find your Psychic Energy or your Beast Energy, and it can just be milled away. So I don't think that necessarily auto-wins, but I do think those are more favourable matchups. But I think where things get a little bit hairy is just the speed of this deck. The rule changes means that going first, you can't just slam Welder into Welder in 2 turns and just knock out a tag team, and then Beast Rings get your second knockout just to beat some of these tag team based decks. Now the best you can hope for really is just getting a couple Poipoles, Dead Changing, getting an attachment in somewhere, and hoping that your charge ups can get you over the line on turn 2 with a Welder. And that's a lot more work. You need to have much more optimal turns, and I think when you are playing these tech cards for control, for example, you do water down your deck a little bit. So I think the consistency element of Blacephalon GX isn't necessarily there compared to some of these other tag teams. Here is my list though. As you can see, it's just got the Stinger package. It's also got that Baby Blown in there. And everything else is more or less pretty standard. You do get the benefit of having Professor's Research in your list now. And Quick Ball is also a big upgrade. I've changed them for Treasures. I think they are that much better. Also keeping the Cherish Balls and a slightly higher Ultra Space count to previously, where Space was normally like a 2 count. I think I like it as a 3 count once I've swapped Quick Balls to Treasures, just so you have more access to those Nagas overall. But yeah, overall you should have really good outs to find early attackers. Early Dedenne, you now have 6 Ball Search outs, which is a slight improvement there as well. And your physical supported cards get way better. You get to play Research, which is a deeper dig on turns where you want Beast Rings. And Marnie is also your disruptive option. I'm preferring it to Reset Stamp just so you have better early game hands kind of thing. I've got a Rangaroo in here. I'm not sure how many times you actually get to use him in this deck because of bench space, but there will certainly be those moments where you have not a lot going on, and the monkey's going to save you from getting rid of a Beast Ring or a Great Catcher here or there, and essentially it's just a deeper dig on those Beast Ring turns. So I feel like he's a valid include, potentially with more testing with Blounds GX. It may just be a bench space too much right now. And you can think about having some of these other tech options in his place. I think that's the most flexible card I have in the list right now. So you could play around with your gusting effects. You could think about having a Fion in here potentially. A Ditto just for extra Naganadel outs. Like I said, you can't Welder turn 1 anymore going first, so getting multiple Poipole down is more of a priority. We've previously seen Ditto Prism in the deck. That was back when we had a lower muck, of course, but just having a 5th Poipole isn't the worst idea these days. or just more access to fire energies as well. If you're worried about things like Chaotic Swell, you may want to have Fiery Flint in here instead of like an extra Giant Hearth or something like that, just to get more fires instantly accessed to then potentially bin them off with like research and stuff. So yeah, a few things to play around with Blounds, but I think the core of the deck doesn't really change, and you get some nice new supporters, so I don't think it's the worst deck in the world, thanks to its typing mainly. In at number 9, we have ZacianLucmetal Melmetal. It's the more defensive approach of Zacian, and I think it can cause headaches for a handful of decks out there. Most importantly, I think this might have one of the strongest matchups against ADP Zacian. Possibly the best deck in the format. It's what everyone's touting to be the best deck, so it's going to be no surprise when you see it higher up on my list. But this is one of the decks that can boast potentially the best matchup against it. You have so much walling potential with the Lucmetal GX attack. You have Crushing Hammers in the list as well to try and stop an ADP getting its own GX attack off in the first place. And all the while you're building up Zacians in the back to start using those Brave Blades. So yeah, pretty decent. You can see the community is kind of in line. We're not thinking that this is the best way to play Zacian, but we can certainly consider it one of the top 10 decks in the format. I think the reason that puts me off this sort of archetype is you can see it has some very, very unfavorable matchups. You essentially kind of almost have like a Guardian style effect where you really want to see a couple decks, you really want to dodge a couple decks as well in the room. So you got to just sort of hope that you can survive the opening few rounds. Maybe you can get around some ability Zards, get around Baby Blounds, get around Mill. Those are 3 archetypes that I have on my top 10, of course, and I expect them to be pretty decent for Oceania. So I think that's the reason why I'm a little bit skeptical of playing this more defensive list, because we don't have, like, our strategy can't really change much. We're trying to be this denial-style deck, and it's really hard to deny Baby Blound's ability Zard, and denial doesn't do anything to Mill. So yeah, I think those are the reasons why I'm a little bit skeptical of this sort of list. Here we go, though. Here is my 60. We're playing 8 coin flip cards, so if you are a coin flip gamer, you'll enjoy playing 4 Crushing, 4 Pokemon Catcher as the Gust. I'm preferring this to just having custom catchers, because I think our engine isn't necessarily all there to support customs. For the Pokemon, we've got a bunch of like individual single prizes. The Mimikyu to help out against Mewtwo decks. You got the Mew to help out against PikaRom, and again helps out a little bit against Mewtwo. You got that that Dustmane Necrozma, I should say. That's going to help put some things in range of Brave Blades later down the line for just 1 attachment, which is pretty good against tag team attackers. And then you got things like Absol to try and slow down the opponent. It goes well with our like Marnies that we have in here. At the moment, I'm not playing Reset Stamp. I'm actually reducing the amount of Reset Stamp in a lot of my decks that you'll see today. And that's mainly because I'm expecting Jirachi to be in a bunch of decks anyways, and there's Professor's Research now. So the effectiveness of Reset Stamp actually goes down a little bit in my estimations. Also because a lot of the decks on my top 10, I actually think none of my decks on the top 10 are even playing Power Plant. So with Quick Ball outs as well, Stamp just becomes a little bit worse in general because people just naturally have more outs from like their 2 or 3 card hand that they get given to just draw a fresh like 6 or 7. So I'm at the moment just having Marnie for hand refresh and some mini disruption to make life awkward for the opponent, but not necessarily relying on Stamp as much as I used to. But they're still in a couple of decks for sure. You could consider having Aurora Energy ADP in this list. It's my original Lucmetal Zacian list that I put on the channel. Did play ADP Aurora, and I think it will make your life a little bit easier if you are up against things like the Mill-style deck. If you're up against Baby Blounds, you actually have a fighting chance against them if you do play that ADP. And right now, we're not. The only reason that makes life awkward for adding in that ADP is spaces. You end up having to cut away things like possibly Mew, possibly cutting into your Lucmetal count, maybe just play a 1-1 of each and go whichever direction is important in the matchup. Like, those are things I've kind of considered, but it's a little bit risky to only play 1 of each tag team, knowing that you want to get the GX value of, you know, both in any which situation. So yeah, the other thing you can consider is Shrine. I think Shrine can help out for increasing your damage that little bit more, and also is more disruptive in combination with that Mimikyu against the Mewtwo players. So if you want to have Shrine instead of Swell, you can certainly go down that route. The Swells right now should be slowing down things like PikaRom, which is pretty nice. Also slowing down Welder decks as well, which is pretty welcome, seeing as though we can't deal with them too easily. So yeah, that's my list on the Lucmetal Zacian. It's certainly the one that I've found less effective than ADP overall, just because of the matchups that I'm expecting to be some of the top players out there right now. In at number 8, we have Goons. The community is also expecting this one to do reasonably well. I don't think it's the most consistent deck out there, and I think you are pretty much dependent on the opponents that you come up against at OCIC. If your opponent is having tech Pokemon or answers, or just happen to be playing one of the unfavorable matchups, you're probably going to lose. But if they don't have many answers to obstruct, you're probably going to win. Like, that's pretty much the power of Obstagoon. He just says no in a lot of situations, makes life very awkward for people. And if they don't have sufficient answers, Goons is going to do pretty well. You love seeing Baby Blounds. They essentially play no answers whatsoever, so that is almost free. ZacianLucmetal and PikaRom, they should be favorable, but PikaRom and ZacianLucmetal both have plays they can try and do. Obviously, ZacianLucmetal has the GX attack as well as Crushing Hammers to try and disrupt your flow of using Obstruct, which can be awkward. PikaRom has things like Paralysis, they can do Fion, Snipe plays, they can do all sorts of things. And they obviously have good access to things like Reset Stamp and Custom Catchers, so they can make sure that they are knocking out things like Mew, and then being able to snipe later down the line as well is not too difficult for them. So those matchups are in your control a lot of the time, but they at least have things that they can be doing against you. Same for the Mewtwo decks, it depends what their techs are really. Ability Zard and ADP ZACIAN, I think, also have sometimes enough just to get through you, either with a prize race, just by ignoring the Goons, or going, like, well, Ability Zard can use the Double Blaze, so can Welder Mewtwo, and ADP ZACIAN normally plays a combination of Customs and Fion and stuff that can make life awkward for them as well. So, yeah, I think these are all things to consider. For unfavorables, Blacephalon GX, I don't think you want to see too much. They have a bunch of evolution Pokemon, and they have Stinger as well if they have like a slower start, and they really need to get through you in different ways, and you have no real answers to Mill. You're not fast enough, basically. Here's my list, though. I do think it's worth completely going towards Obstruct. From what I've seen, it's the only way this deck can win, but it's a very powerful win condition, and we've tried to lean into that as much as possible. We've got the double Stealthy Hood to help out against opposing Fions, so your Obstagoons don't get thrown back to the bench. We've got Wobbuffet in here as well to shut down Malamar Mewtwo's players from using Ditto Prism Star, which is nice. And it can sometimes help out against things like PikaRom for like slowing them down, just if you happen to find the Wob. You got the Mew in there as well, of course. We've got the high Doll count. We do still have one Sableye V and Yveltal GX. I use these extremely sparingly. You use them to accelerate your win condition or just to be threatening knockouts faster in games. But you don't really put them down like on the opening turns ever. You just try and weave them in when they're useful. It really is a very fat Obstagoon deck. You're really trying to lean into that as much as possible. For other options, I think Weavile is actually an interesting card in the format. Evil Admonition can do a huge amount again, and we have better Bull Search for that card again. Spiritomb could be another attacker if you want to have something just sort of gaining value in the back, as opposed to maybe something like Sableye or Yveltal. You could be more proactive in putting Spiritombs on board and trying to get them powered up, ready to go. Catcher if you want better Gust than the Great Catcher that I'm playing right now. Energy Switch / Bead to power up a Sableye V out of nowhere, which could be pretty interesting, or have a bit of response to Energy Disruption from ZacianLucmetal and stuff, which could be interesting. Absol to help the cause with your Marnies. Marnie is in here to try and disrupt people from using custom catchers all the time. And once you've got an Obstagoon going, basically all you need to do is find more Obstagoon pieces and energies. That's like all you need. So once you've built the Goon, Marnie's like a really, really good card. And having Absol in here obviously disrupts those Stellar Wishes and makes life even more annoying for the opponent. So that's where I'm at with Goons right now. Just say Obstruct and try and win off that is essentially the core strategy of this deck. But the strategy is viable against a lot of things, so something to bear in mind. In at number 7, we have Welder Mewtwo. This is one of the top 10s that I'm actually in alignment with the community in a lot of ways. We've both put this in at ranked 7. I've had Welder Mewtwo as high as 4th and as low as like 9th because I've had varied results for this archetype right now. I've had sort of... Well, I think you can have two schools of thought with Welder Mewtwo. Either you can be an all-singing, all-dancing list that has text for every matchup, so you have answers to Mill, you have answers to Goons, you have answers to like Keldeo, GX and stuff like that. You keep all those answers in there, but you become a little bit less consistent than you would like. Or you just go, forget these techs. I'm not going to find enough of these, you know, like kind of lower tier in the top 10 sort of archetypes, and instead I'm just going to go smash with my Mewtwo, just have the core strategy online and find space for things like acrobikes and such to be a little bit more consistent and streamlined. So I think trying to get a balance between those and pick your matchups is going to be really important for Welder Mewtwo players going into the OCIC, because it's going to be rough. Like, sometimes you'll just run into a couple of the bad matchups that you weren't teching for, or if you are going all around with techs, you may end up like not even facing that sort of that archetype in the day, and then you'd prefer to have just been more consistent overall against like the more core stuff, like the ADP Zacians and the mirrors and the PikaRoms and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's something that you have to weigh up as the Welder Mewtwo player. But overall, I think that makes it kind of watered down in a lot of situations, which is why I don't have it quite as high on the list. I also think that the newcomers of Malamar Mewtwo or ADP Zacian, they're not necessarily matchups that you like to go into. They can be a little bit awkward for you. I think you're not great against Mill. My list right now isn't great against Mill because I'm not playing Stinger. If you want to play Stinger and Psychic Blound, you certainly can. They'll be on my tech options in the next slide. And also, I don't think you're a big fan of Baby Blounds either. So a couple new matchups sort of creeping in that make life a little bit awkward for Welder Mewtwo, I would say. Here is my 60 though. The balancing act that I have gone for is I'm keeping Greninja GX in the list to help out against Obstagoon / Keldeo GX. And also we are playing not many other techs actually. Yeah, we're just playing that stuff. We're playing the Big Charm to help out against ZacianLucmetal, ZacianLucmetal ADP of course. We're still playing that Stealthy Herd. We've got one copy of Weak Guard in here. I'm playing the mini tag call engine still at the moment. You could consider just going full Welder Research 60 as well if you want to, or even just the Welder Poker Gear base builds and try and go full turbo. But this is basically where I'm at. You get to upgrade your 2 great catchers to play 1 great catcher and a couple Pokemon catchers for a bit more control over what your opponent's doing. You have a Rangaroo in here as well to sort of protect those gusting cards, protect those stamps, but actually super importantly is protect things like fire energy, so that when you do things like a Dead change, you can guarantee a fire energy on the other side of those 6 to give yourself decent odds of not only hitting the physical Welder, but having targets for Welder. That's something that I've always had a headache with Mewtwo, is that you end up having fire energies the wrong side of the hand before you need to try and hit Welder. And we are playing 3 Giant Half as our only stadium, and I'm playing the Marshadow right now. You could also consider things like Chaotic Swell in the list. You could think about changing up those gusting approaches for customs, Marnie for hand disruption. There are a few GXs that I'm not playing right now. SBDO is one that you previously have seen for sure, and Break Zard as well is not in my 60. For Nagandel GX, I'm talking about the Stinger here, is something that you could be playing. I've also considered cutting the Jirachi package and having a Zacian V in the list instead. The Jirachi takes up a couple spaces, of course. You've got to have a higher switch count. You've got to fit that escape board in. If you just go the Zacian, you get to put a 4th Quick Ball in your deck, and then you get to play 1 Zacian. Zacian only gets value for like 1 turn a lot of the time, or like if you've been stamped and you don't have anything else to do. So that's something you could bear in mind. But at the moment, I'm a little bit concerned about the amount of decks that will just punish a turn 1 Jirachi that sat there Stellar Wish passing. So that's something that's really up to you. You could also think about having more fire attackers in here, like Victini V. That's certainly been in a handful of the Japanese 60s that I've seen. But yeah, this is my Welder Mewtwo. I must confess I've not played a huge amount of Welder Mewtwo. Didn't even play it in the last format. I've always been the ADP player, so my 60s for Mewtwo are always a little bit rough, and I always try and talk about the list with some of my friends who play the archetype a little bit more. So there are still a bunch of directions you could go with Mewtwo. If you don't like the mini tackle package, you can chop that out. If you just want to go for welders, you can certainly go down that route. If you want acrobikes in here as well, like I say, if you want to trim away from like Greninja GX, it's a card that I hate putting in the list, but something that I'm just doing right now because of Goons. You can certainly make those changes accordingly. So yeah, that's the list we're rocking with right now for Mewtwo. One thing I will say is that I think the Big Charm is super, super important going into this tournament. I think that's a really big deal for sure. Also, another tech Pokemon you can think about is Indeedee for mirrors slash to help out against Mimikyu as well. That's another thing I should have had in the other options, but as you know, Mewtwo is a complete toolbox and can play like a million cards, so it was always going to be missing a few bits and pieces here and there. In at number 6, we have Baby Blacephalon. I've lumped in the Jirachi and Greens builds, so I'll be showing off 2 different lists for Baby Blounds after this slide. But yeah, I think the archetype is actually pretty solid. From what I've seen so far, I've tested mostly the Jirachi Lucky Egg base build over the Greens Lucky Egg base build, but I know there are some people who are big advocates of Baby Blounds. It's had some decent results in the previous format. It seems to be getting better, and there are a handful more fire weak Pokemon in the format as well, of course, which is never a bad sign for Baby Blounds being a big one-hit KO merchant, essentially. So going into this tournament, if you're expecting to face a bunch of tag teams, I think Baby Blounds is obviously a very good deck. If you're only expecting to see maybe like one Goons/one control deck in day one, Baby Blounds seems like an obvious pick to me for being a deck that gets you to day two. I think it's certainly good enough to do that. There's a lot of hype around control, and that could mean two things. Either it turns up in big numbers and makes your day pretty bad, or people are teching for Mill, it does badly, and you get to benefit as the Baby Blounds player. So I'd expect this deck to do pretty well, actually. I have it on 6, but I could see it climbing the list as well. It depends what meta shapes out in OCIC, how many people are actually going for the Cinccino lock, or how many people are playing Goons, because you really have no answers to those decks in these lists at all. Yes, you have things like Victini Prism to try and reload your fire energies against the Mill deck, but they can just play Wob, and they will be playing Wob for sure. And especially the Jirachi Blounds, you don't have very good ways of gusting that card. The Greens list can obviously gust up the Wob a little bit better and maybe have more of a fighting chance against Mill, but I still would consider it to be one of your worst matchups for sure. So, yeah, that's where we're at with Baby Blounds. Face the tag team decks and profit, basically. We'll start off with the ability to base list. I love ZACIAN in the 60 so much that I've gone up to 2 copies. I had initially one ZACIAN, one Ornery Rod. Now I just love the value of gaining 3 cards into my hand. So we've gone up to 2 copies. We've really tried to just make sure that we get into the game. A few other cards that I've loved playing in here. Stadium Nav is busted good in this deck. It's essentially like a second copy of Heat Factory in your opening hands. And let me tell you, that is immense value to get yourself rolling in the game. I really do think that's very strong. Otherwise, you know, you can just have a lot of bricks with this. I will say as well that with the Baby Blounds decks, you pick going second almost every time. Unless you're up against decks that you know can't get rolling with their evolutions or whatever, I think you really do want to go second, especially with the Greens list, but also with this 60 a lot as well, just so you have 4 more outs to draw cards with your Welder in those opening turns. So I think naturally selecting second is a really, really good deal for these sorts of decks. But yeah, this is the Baby Blounds list. I think the things that are really lacking right now is great gusting opportunities. We have one Fion, one Great Catcher that might punish us later down the line. I've seen some other cute packages like playing Adventure Bag plus Beastbringer. That could also be pretty interesting. So you get more value out of knocking out a tag team and take a full prize knockout, and then you're just a Great Catcher away from game, which can sometimes be insane for you. Or again, against like ADP ZACIAN, you just knock out 1 ADP and 1 ZACIAN and you're over the line. So I can certainly see Beastbringer coming into the 60 for those sorts of matchups to make it more favorable in your side. Ornery Rod to recover some Pokemon. And Pokegears to just give yourself more outs to Welders is not unreasonable at all. Right now, though, I'm loving those ZACIANs. I'm loving the high Jirachi count just to have good starts. Oricorio GX is a bit of a liability for prize racing against certain decks, especially because Great Catcher is still played in a good amount of archetypes. But I think it just gives you so much value. You need to have big hand sizes to do damage with Fireball Circus. You need to keep digging into these retrievals, these fire crystals, these flints to get over the line. And I think oftentimes Oricorio GX is the way that this deck works. So yeah, I think these are all decent options. If you are super worried about Goons, you could try playing Ultra Forest Cart Envoy. You already played Power Pad, so getting through like 2 Obscure may be good enough for you to win the game. But I think it's still pretty rough, and I wouldn't personally add the tech because this deck already plays a bunch of jank. And here is the Green Space 60. It really hasn't changed much from the previous set. The only things I've added are 1 Retrieval, 2 Quick Balls, and 2 Lucky Eggs. Those Lucky Eggs certainly can chip in, making sure that you don't just brick off of stamps/monies. But otherwise, the 60 is really, really the same as it previously has been. A few other options you could think about. Again, there's that Cart Envoy. There's the Adventure Bag Beastbringer thing, if you want to weave that into your list. There's potential for like Rosa Beastring as well. And Ordinary Rod for recovering Pokemon. But at the moment, we're trying to be as streamlined as possible. I think the only real greed card I have in the list is a Reset Stamp. But that card is just pretty good. And it can get you out of a bunch of binds. So I think that's a decent enough include for the list. But yeah, that's the Green Space build. If you're not concerned about getting donked, you can try out this 60. I think in best of threes, playing this list is super sketchy though, because you will get donked a handful of times and it's going to be rough. If you want to increase your quick ball count or again add things like Stadium Nav to your list to give yourself better outs to Ultra Space, you can certainly do that as well. Not too much wiggle room in this 60, but that's where we're at the moment. In at number 5, we have Malamar Mewtwo. The community is slightly more hyped on this one, but from my testing, I think I've tested Malamar Mewtwo and ADP ZACIAN the most out of any of the other decks on this top 10, and my results with this deck are not great. I'm still putting it at top 5 because we know that the combos are there. We know that Horror House is insane and can win games. We know that Night Watch plus Marnie is a filthy combo. And its matchup spread is not bad. I've said a bunch of things at close matchups here, and that's really because you can instantly beat any of these decks if a Horror House play works when the opponent only has one Pokemon down, or if a Night Watch Marnie play works and they just have like an attached pass play or like a, you know, just attack into you with whatever. They can just instantly lose. If one of these sort of gambits pays off, you're just in amazing shape with Malamar Mewtwo. Certain decks like ADP ZACIAN and PikaRom, they play really, really high item counts. They play a bunch of custom catchers. They either play like Saucers or Electro Powers. They fill their deck with item cards. So sometimes early like Horror House Poltergeist knocks out a tag team. The game's instantly over. So there are some great plays that you can do with Malamar Mewtwo. I know the power is there, but I found it to be quite inconsistent. Sometimes the Poltergeist doesn't get the job done. Sometimes you only get one, or like you miss an Inkay, or you only get one down, and then you miss the Malamar the next turn. Sometimes you can't move into your Mewtwo turn 1. Sometimes your opponent's just playing Mewtwo tech cards, you know? And also you're obviously still weak to Psychic. So there are a bunch of things that I think is awkward here. One thing I do really like about this deck is it does challenge Mill quite nicely, just naturally with Night Watch. So having a natural sort of check in the meta to make do Mill is really good. And I think with other people going away from Mewtwo, and this one being the sort of most popular one, isn't necessarily a bad thing either. So it's up to you. Let me know how consistent you found Mewtwo Malamar. I know a bunch of people, a bunch of my friends, and a bunch of people in my chat, whenever I've been playing this archetype on stream or whatever, people have said, yeah, I've kind of been bricking with it as well sometimes, but there are other games where I just instantly win turn 2 because I did, you know, Night Watch or Horror House and the opponent just did nothing, you know. So, yeah, Malamar Mewtwo certainly has a lot of power spike turns behind it. It can instantly win from like a turn 2 sort of play, but sometimes the combos don't quite come together. This is the 60 that we're rocking with right now. I have gone back to the Ultra Necrozma GX after initially having it out of the list. I still like having that Sky Scorching Light as an option against some one-prizer decks. Also, with that Giratina, you can try and knock out multiple Jirachis and stuff, which can sometimes be pretty reasonable for you. And I really like that Photon Geyser is essentially a Dragonite plus a Solgaleo Lunala in one card. So it kind of gains you a space. There's been points where I've had a Dragonite in here. There's been points where I've had a Solgaleo Lunala GX in here, just for their different damage outputs. But the Photon Geyser can do both in one card, which I think is pretty decent for sure. At the moment, I'm just playing 4 Quick Ball, 4 Treasures, and 2 Tag Calls, but I have previously had a very high count of Cherish Ball in here, in addition to the other 8 Ball Search cards. I've previously had 3 Acrobikes in here as well. So I've tried all sorts of different builds of this, just trying to make it as consistent as possible at times. There's actually been renditions of this list that I've had that have played no Great Catcher, well, no Gust at all in the list, just to make it work more often. And I actually think that's not the most unreasonable thing in the world, to be honest. It might force you to have more sort of spread-style attackers. Possibly having like Stinger Baby Blown in the list could be something you could think about, just to have more spread against stuff. You know what I mean? If you're not playing the Great Catcher, just for some backup options. But I think this deck is kind of gambity in a lot of situations. You're just trying to get lucky off of Horror House Poltergeist or get lucky off of Marnie or Night Watch. And sometimes it pays off big, and sometimes it just doesn't. So I found it to be a bit iffy. I've put a bunch of different options on the side here as well. Big Charm can obviously help out against ADP ZACIAN. Cherish Ball for just more outs to the Dedenne and more outs to just early attackers is always something you could consider. If you don't like the Great Catchers, you could go to Pokemon Catcher, or you could just instantly cut them. I've genuinely considered cutting all of those Great Catchers. I don't think they're high-performing cards for me whenever I've played this deck. And you can also consider Sinlin. I actually don't think it's that bad in this list, because sometimes you just want more outs to supporters, and it's an extra discard synergy card as well for you. You can just get rid of a Pokemon and draw 3 cards, or get rid of a Psych Energy and draw 3, and get back like a Marnie or a Malolana for certain situations. I've misspelled Acrobike there, but you can try having those in the 60 as well if you really want to. Not much else to say. I've got a slightly high Inkay count, because it's super important to get hopefully 2 down. We've got the Ditto Prism, so you can evolve into a Naganadel GX against Goons, which is something to bear in mind. Other than that, it's a pretty straightforward list. In at number 4, we have Ability Zard. This is the deck that I think is way, way better than expected right now. My testing has been great for Ability Zard. I've found it to be one of the top performers for me in my playtesting so far, on ladder and playing against friends IRL. The community just had it peaking out of the top 10. I have it right on up here at number 4. It won the previous IC. It hasn't gained a bunch, but the metagame around it seems pretty good. You body ZacianLucmetal and you're insane against Make-Do Mill. You embarrass them. It's really not that hard for you at all. You have amazing Gust to deal with their early Zacians that they used to draw. And of course you have Victini V. Yes, they have Wob, but you can Gust it with Ninetales. That's the beauty of it. So Mill can't do jack to you really, which is just insane. Unless they, again, do like Belelba high rolls on hitting your Victini Prism too early for you to search it out and get it into play. So I think those matchups are super good for you. I always previously found PikaRom to be pretty decent for Ability Zard, and I still find that to be the case. ADP Zacian, I found it pretty 50-50. So I think that's okay. I actually have it more than 50-50. I think it's favored for Ability Zard for sure. For close matchups, I think you're okay against the other Mewtwo stuff. Not the best of matchups, but I always think you have great burst potential against them. Baby Blounds, I actually think is closer than expected. More so the Jirachi, Zacian, Oricorio list, because they put down a couple of 2 prizes in the process, and then the trade becomes pretty even, because we still have a couple 1 prizes that we can use in the 60. Goons is pretty close. We don't naturally play a lot of answers, but we have a combination of Ninetales that can attack and Gust, which is pretty good, and we have Double Blaze GX that can get through at least 1, which is pretty decent. Malamar Mewtwo, it's all down to whether we can like Stellar Wish out of a low hand size or something like that, or find outs towards Dead Change or whatever else. And I do think Blounds GX is slightly unfavored, but I don't think it's anything that this deck can't really manage. I think naturally the turn 1 rule supporter change is sometimes a little bit awkward. You don't quite have as much burst potential as you used to, but I think that's sort of made up for by the typing that we have and just the natural strength of Ninetales. When there's a format of a mixture of GXs, non-GXs, and V Pokemon now, Ninetales is such a good bragging right. It's a super good Gusting card, in my opinion. Here is my 60. It's the same as the channel 60 that I did just a couple of days ago. Yeah, I think it's really good. It's a simple 60 that just gets the job done as much as possible with Zard, because I'm basically saying that Ability Zard's core strategy is good enough to beat anything in the format right now. And just making that happen as much as possible is the best thing for you. You could try some other tech attackers, of course. There's a couple nice V Pokemon you could go for. Volcanion with that Flare starter can get a bunch of energies into play. It can give you a bit of respite if you miss Welder. Or in addition to Welder, of course, you can just completely snowball out the game. Big Charm is something that I might actually consider going into this 60, just to, again, help out against the ADP Zacian, because even though we can try and like knock out those Zacians proactively, sometimes you just can't get your Ninetales in time or whatever, and you can try and have Big Charm to stick onto your Charizard to stay out of range, which is sometimes something you can certainly bear in mind. In at number 3, I have PikaRom. Committee, again, pretty much are respecting this archetype to be one of the strongest contenders. Obviously, it's got a lot of hype from that win that it had in the large Japanese tournament at the sort of birth of Sword&Shield, with, I think, over 1,500 or so players, which is just excellent. Now, my matchup spread is very, very harsh on PikaRom. The matchup spread doesn't look good, but let me tell you, PikaRom out-consistencies a bunch of these decks. Some of these closer matchups, some of these unfavorables even, I would say, you can win as PikaRom in a best of 3 just because you full blitzed on 1. That's genuinely it. I think if you sit down and theory out a lot of these matchups, you would think that PikaRom's a little bit behind, but then you just have to remember that there's a lot of draw that PikaRom has. Sometimes you're seeing like, like 20 or so cards when you factor in Dead Change, Prof Research, and Stellar Wish, You can see so many cards in a turn that it means that you have crazy highlight reel moments where you triple E power, blow someone up, or you, have a stamp, customs, attack, play. You have, obviously, the Raichu GX attack, which is still crazy good. There are still a bunch of tag team decks around right now. You have those big moments where you just all in onto your PikaRom, hope your opponent can't answer you, then you can do a massive tag bolt. Like, there's still so many things you can do as PikaRom, and like, turn 1 full blitz is always the equalizer for this deck. Anything that comes up against a turn 1 full blitz is going to be on the back foot, because it's just pretty aggressive, pretty fast and is awkward to deal with for sure. So these matchup spreads don't look kind for the deck. I think the only deck that you don't want to see really is PikaRom is Mill, and the rest you just have to hope that you're the most consistent deck in the room and that you can sometimes have the better rub of the green of finding custom stamps or E-powers at the right moments to make sure that your math adds up and can take advantage of some of these great tag team GX attacks. So yeah, here is my list right now. I'm actually going to show two 60s. This is going to be the sort of more aggressive list that has the high radar count and 3 Dedenne. This is trying to maximize that turn 1 full blitz as much as possible. You can see a couple of cute cards I've got in here. Obviously, when you have the Volkner and the Research, you don't have the Tag Call engine. So we have a couple interesting items in here. We have one Stadium Nav to try and grant access to that Thunder Mountain, but also I'm playing Adventure Bag. Adventure Bag and 3 individual one-of tools. The Big Charm obviously is important against ADP ZACIAN, also helps you keep out of low puff range against some of these Mewtwo players. But Vitality Band is a really, really big card, in my opinion. It's excellent at math fixing. It's oftentimes as good as an E-Power in a lot of situations. With that Coco V or using a Tag Bolt, that 200 comes to 10, so then you just need 2 E-Powers. Full Blitz now can one-shot Dedenne as well, so it's like a 5th E-Power out in your deck. So that Vital Band is also really, really good in the 60s. So much so that I've gone for Adventure Bag to try and get that stuff out. So sometimes you just go for Volkner to get Energy Bag. The bag gets you a skateboard for your Jirachi, as well as one of these other tools that can help you out. I still think this is one of the best decks out there for trying to access Stamp at the right time. You still have good access to customs when you have Jirachi, now Oranguru, and the high Volkner count. So yeah, it still just does what it says on the tin for a lot of times. I have since cut Tag Switch just to have 2 energy switches, just to, again, increase the turn 1 full blitz odds as much as possible. I'm not playing Great Catcher, we're just playing the customs right now, but you can add in that extra gusting effect if you want to. You could also try the Fion instead of the Great Catcher. If you want to have some more hand disruption, Marnie is certainly something you could add in. Possibly going down to 1 stamp and adding in like 2 Marnie, 2 Research. That's something that I've experimented with. Zeraora for some more pivoting options. Again, can certainly help out your full blitz odds. Marshallow to get rid of swells can be nice. To lean into that Thunder Mountain a little bit more. Absol for disrupting opposing Jirachi builds, and Mew to help out in Mirror/Mewtwo could also be considered. So there's still lots of wiggle room for this sort of archetype. And then here we have the Tag Call package. This is the list that, well, this is more close to the 60 that did well in Japan and got that first place. I still got 1 Radar in here and only 2 Tag Calls, so it's kind of a mix and match right now. I'm again still opting to play that 1 Vitality Band. I found it to be very, very useful in my testing so far. So I really do like having that option in here. Not much else, really. We've incorporated the unit energy to help out with the Guzhala. We've got 1 Malolana in here just for a bit of extra heal and can help do some movement as well. Even in this list, I'm opting not to play Zeraora. Again, it's a preference thing, but if you do like the Zeraora in the 60, you certainly can go for that. This list does have the space to have that extra 1 Great Catcher in the list, but really that's all we're looking at in terms of differences. Still having a pretty high prof research count, which I think is, again, very, very decent for you. Just essentially a little bit less reliant on Dedenne GX overall. In at number 2, we have Cinccino Mill, or Make Do Mill, Cinccino Control, whatever you want to call it. It essentially just tries to spam Bellelba and Bryson Man with Lieutenant Surge, mill a bunch of cards out of your opponent's deck, send up things like Dolls or Oranguru, and get back things like Palpads from your deck. Back into your deck to then just mill them all over again, essentially. So, yeah, I'm sure you've come up against this on the ladder. I'm sure you've heard about this. It sort of gained some traction a couple of weeks back, and now it's everywhere on the ladder, and it's everyone's hot topic. I think this archetype is very dangerous, just looking at its matchup spread. There will be matchups that you just can't really lose against. I think you just instantly beat Goons, Blounds, ZacianLucmetal, and PikaRom. Like, they can't actually do anything to your deck. And then it's down to these other archetypes in the format to try and make life more awkward for Cinccino Mill. From literally just yawning its way to victories. That's what's so insane about this deck. You don't even have to, like... Because you have so much consistency in the deck naturally that, like, you don't worry about bricking against any of these favorable matchups. It's really just down to what sort of answers they have. I think Ability Zard is naturally hideous unless you play Hoods. Now, we definitely saw Florgus Dolls incorporate Hoods into their 60 back in the day just to make sure that their Dolls stick around. But even then, I think because you don't have early draw outside of like Zacian, which makes you pass your turn anyway, that if they're just going to be using Ninetales turn 2 and gusting up that Zacian, they're still getting a lot of value out of that, and you need to play like a high hood count. You need to play 4, and you need to make sure that your entire board, apart from the doll, has a hood on, otherwise it's not going to be great. So the hoods really do take up a lot of space in the deck, so I'm not sure if it's worth teching against for Ability Zard when you may only see one sort of day one, you know what I mean? I'm personally super hype on Ability Zard. I might, like, if it was me, I'd probably play Ability Zard at the tournament if I didn't love ADP Zacian so much. So those would be like my top 2 picks, but I think you shouldn't really expect a huge amount of Ability Zard unless, you know, Cinccino Mill is that much on the radar that you pretty much have to. And then there's some of these other closer matchups. ADP Zacian, they have decent gust. They take additional prizes when they want to. You have Crushing Hammers that can try and slow down their ADP GX attack, which can be really good for you. Buy you some more time to start milling stuff. But otherwise, that can be pretty rough. It's basically down to how much gust you can get rid of in your mills early on in the game. Welder Mewtwo, I think, is favorable right now for the 60 that I showed, but as soon as they put in Blown Stinger, it becomes awful. Malamar Mewtwo, I think, is pretty rough. They oftentimes will be disrupting your hand a lot of the time, and they don't need to dig for anything. They just sit there with a Mewtwo with 3 energy, just announcing Night Watch every turn, no matter what. They also have sniping available to them to start pinging Cincinos on the bench. So, again, that's also something to bear in mind. And Blowns is naturally playing Stinger, Baby Blown. So, it's up to you, again, to try and Bellelba them as quickly as possible to get rid of some of their core pieces to stop that strategy from working. But yeah, here is the 60 for Cinccino Mill. At the moment, I've got the Wob in here to try and make life a little bit more awkward for Victini. This is at least going to be helpful against the Baby Blowns decks. It also can slow down PikaRom, so it's just not a bad card to find in those opening turns. It's an extra basic Pokemon that can just sit in the active that isn't a Cinccino or Mincino that's dying, so that's also pretty good for you. You've got those Crushings in there. Not much else going on with the 60, actually. It's just trying to make do as much as possible and get towards those Bellelba Surge combos all the time. For other options, you could try and add in some comms. I've certainly seen those in the 60s previously. Stealthy Hoods, as I've said, it's going to eat up a lot of spaces, but you can't beat Ability Zard without them. Team Yellgrunt for more disruption of energies against things like ADP, maybe in order. And Malolana is another thing you could think about in the 60, because we are quite air balloon reliant. And sometimes people actually try and trap you and stop you from using resource management. And because this deck cycles so many cards so quickly, they can actually stop you from using Bellelba and Bryson Man just because, well, they end up like decking you out just because they've trapped you with something. So having a Malolana just means you can always Power Pad it back or Sinlin it back into the hand and make sure that you can still pivot. So that's been a card that I've had a one of in my 60 for a bit. You could also consider something like, Tainlizer if you want to as well, instead of Malolana. But the Malolana is helpful against like Zacian or Mewtwo that just take hits in those opening turns. Obviously, you can Bellelba and Bryson Man away these Zacians and stuff. So you remove those easy 2-prize knockouts from the opponent as quickly as possible once you've got your value from Intrepid Sword. So yeah, I do think this is dangerous. It comes with auto wins, and it's just down to what people are playing and how much they want to tech for this archetype, really, going into the tournament. In at number 1, to no one's surprise, ADP Zacian. This deck is insane. It's not overhyped. It's crazy good. I do think there's going to be a lot of people teching for this, which makes me put a bunch of these matchups in the close category. I'm expecting a bunch of big charms. I'm expecting a bunch of hammers. I'm expecting a bunch of fire decks. You know, I'm expecting everyone to have these sorts of things out there right now. You know that this is public enemy number 1, so it's never going to be that easy for ADP Zacian to just run through the tournament, but I do think the deck is naturally strong enough to compete with all of these answers anyway. The deck is pretty consistent at what it wants to do, and its damage output is just really good. So you're only like unfavorable really against Ability Zard and ZacianLucmetal Zacian, in my opinion. The rest I think is all you should be expecting to be even or better against a lot of the time, and I say even or better, but could be even better than that just because of the consistency and the simplicity of the game plan of an ADP Zacian. Use your GX attack, start rolling with the Zacian. That's really about it. When you are up against Malamar decks, or sorry, not Malamar decks, Mewtwo decks in general, by the way, I always go for the ADP GX attack for just one attachment because they play Latios, both of them, and they'll try and shut you down. So trying to do the turn 1 GX attack with an ADP is actually value against the Mewtwo players. You could think about doing it as well for PikaRom if you really want to, because a lot of the time they do put down multiple tag teams. That's a bit more situational though, because oftentimes they give you time to do the 2 energy GX anyways. Other than that, yeah, just do your normal game plan against everything. My list hasn't changed a huge amount from the initial 60 that I put up on the channel. I'm still favoring customs in the list over things like Pokemon Catcher. I don't like coin flips. I like having outs to Mewtwo Handlock, and I think you can dig through your deck quickly enough with Prof's researchers and like Oranguru and Stellarwish to try and make those customs work a lot of the time, which is great. I still love my 3-stadium split. Labs is super important if you're expecting other people to be playing Big Charm. I think most tag team decks will be at least considering Big Charm going into their 60 to make life easier against this archetype. So play the Labs, in my opinion. Shrine, still super good against things like Mewtwo. Viridian Forest, I still really like just having additional outs to physical energy cards, and it gives you more outs to make your sources live quickly, which I think is also very good. Just filters the deck quite nicely. Only real changes I've done is I've dropped Metal Frying Pan, because I'm not expecting a huge amount of Lucmetal ZACIAN decks. That was the main reason why I had the Frying Pan in, so you could tank opposing ZACIAN V attacks, but I'm expecting Mirror more than I'm expecting the Lucmetal build. So at the moment, I'm just at 2 tools. I still think Vitality Band is super good in addition to the Shrine. I'm just playing 1 Guzhala, and I've gone all the way up to 3 Aurora Energies. Previously, I had 1 Aurora, 1 unit, and 2 Guzhalas, but I prefer just the speed of playing Prof Research over and over again. So that's pretty simple. Also, Dedenne has finally found its way into the list. I should have been playing this earlier. The card is obviously super good, and you want to choose to go first with this deck just so you can alter creation on 2. So you can just attach pass with an ADP. That's why I have quite a high tag call count and 2 ADPs, just to make sure that works. Deadly Change obviously helps you get towards those Auroras and Metal Energies and all that good stuff. So yeah, very, very basic 60. I'm still playing ZACIAN V. I think the card is still super insane, that you want to start this card. Like, it's a 3 free cards. I want those. I really want those cards. So yeah, I still play 4 copies. I imagine going into OCIC, I'd expect most people to be sat at a 3 count of ZACIAN. So if you're looking to put in any of these cards on the right side of the screen, that could be your space. Frying Pan just for more tanking. Helps out against the fire decks as well, of course. Pokemon Catcher if you're not a fan of the customs, but I still super stand by those. Stamp is something that's really lacking in a lot of my 60s, and I could certainly see that going in. Zapdos / Skarmory, you can think about adding those in, because it just means you're like 1 less Saucer away from sometimes winning the game. And Zapdos, if you play the Zapdos, you want to play the 4th Aurora, of course. Fione for more gusting. If you want to have a better time against Goons, you can certainly put that in for the ZACIAN. Crushing Hammers can help out in Mirror, but they do eat into some consistency spaces. Keldeo GX, with again, maybe like 1 or 2 water energies in your 60, is another great way to beat Goons, or to help out against Goons. And Energy Switch, it means you can sometimes pop off with Alter Creation a little bit more quickly, but I don't think it's necessarily that reliable. It can also help against Hammers as well, though. So if you're expecting people to play Hammers at OCIC, the E-switches may be clutch for just going like, okay, cool, you hammered away my energy on ADP turn 1, Saucer, Aurora, E-switch, we're back in it. So yeah, if you're expecting Hammers to start coming down, E-switches are a pretty easy counter to that, as long as you get the sources online. So yeah, that's my 60 with ADP ZACIAN. I still think it's like an insane deck. Even with all the techs that people are expecting to put in, you're just naturally able to, like, you have so much space in this list that you can tech for the techs, basically. And that's where we're at with the list. Outside the top 10, there's still a handful of archetypes that are worth considering. The community are pretty hyped on Eggrow Boom. There's a lot of boomers out there in the Pokemon community. I think the deck's terrible, personally, but I'm sure we'll see a highlight reel moment of it on stream at some point. Morpeko for some hit and run. I think it gets caught in the crossfire of the Mill deck starting to come out. I think more people are going towards Coin Flip Catcher and Customs just because of the Mill deck. So Morpeko kind of gets hit by that, in my opinion. The Frostmoth decks are certainly interesting. I don't think they're that powerful, but I know there's some high-level players looking at Lapras and think that it could be decent. I think Lapras has a decent matchup against ADP ZACIAN, actually, which is something to bear in mind. I think it shouldn't be slept on that much. Mad Cargo is it's another fire deck. It gets through Goons. It has some mill options against the control deck as well, so that's a pretty decent archetype, I think. For me, Garchomp Giratina or like Roxy Chomp or whatever, I think it can still do those early stamp plays and make life difficult for you, but you pretty much, in my opinion, are worse than a Welder Mewtwo, a Malamar Mewtwo for disruption, and your damage output is like similar, so I'm not a huge fan of that archetype. Stonejourner, you have good early pressure with Zygarde. You can get this guy going. Not many decks can get through Stonejourner that easily, but I still think Max Rockfall, its damage output just is a little bit below the bar for me right now. And then there's still the option of going, you know, old-fashioned Mali Tags. If you're expecting a bunch of Mewtwo decks out there, Mali Tags isn't the worst deck. It's also obviously decent against things like Baby Blounds, so there are some actually okay matchups for Malamar, but I don't think it's, again, that consistent, and I don't think it's great against ADP ZACIAN, so already that's putting me off for sure. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I know it's been a long video. Hopefully I've been able to unload a bunch of my information from all my playtesting. Thanks so much for watching the streams, and make sure you go ahead and watch the official stream. I'm unfortunately not attending Australia this time around. I'm saving my cash for NAIC. That's where I'll be heading for my next IC. Obviously, I'll go to EU as well. But yeah, if you want to have fun, Ability Zard for me is super, super fun, and I also think it's pretty competitive. But if you want to win games, I can't tell anyone not to play ADP ZACIAN. It's still the deck that's had some of the best results for me. Early on, I've not made too many tweaks from my initial 60. I think it's still really, really fine. So yeah, the archetype seems good. You can tweak it however you like. But I think overall we should be expecting at least one ADP ZACIAN in top 8, probably higher up as well. So yeah, let me know what you guys think about the OCIC, what's going to come out on top. Will ZACIAN ADP be techful? Will Mill be dominating the tournament? I'll hear it all down below. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in another video tomorrow. Cheers.